Good evening and welcome to today's session, Supporting Brain Development and Executive Function Skills Through Play. I would first like to thank the Abu Dhabi Early Childhood Authority for making this initiative a reality. As parents, it's so important that we have opportunities to connect with one another, and especially in these difficult times of a pandemic, to have information and support and reassurance that we're all doing our best in a difficult situation to continue to support and grow our littlest people. My name is Christine Snyder. I'm an early childhood specialist in Michigan in the United States. I am currently running an early childhood school on a university campus in Ann Arbor, Michigan. We have about 160 children at full capacity. Due to the pandemic right now, we have about 90 children. I have 45 full-time staff. I'm also an adjunct professor at a local university, and I have several years experience teaching in classrooms, supporting teachers and parents, and understanding how children learn and grow and develop. And I also have two children of my own, a 7-year-old and a 1-year-old. And throughout our session today, I will share examples from all of those experiences, myself as a classroom teacher, myself and my husband as parents, and also as a leader in a school where we have a full range of children developing from birth to 5 years. It's an honor to be here with you tonight. I hope as we explore these ideas together that you get some new concepts, new things that you can try in your home and in your actions with your children. And if you think of any questions as we go, you can put them there in the chat box. We'll have some time for some Q&A at the end. So thanks so much for being here. I'm going to share my screen and get started with our presentation. So today we're talking about supporting brain development and executive function through play. And one of the things I didn't mention is that I'm one of 8 children. I have 7 brothers and sisters. I'm the second oldest, so I spend a lot of time playing with them and changing diapers and making food and just really interacting. And as a young person myself, I didn't fully understand all of the things that are happening during those interactions and during those simple moments of play. And as I decided to pursue a career in early childhood education, and as I became a parent myself, I started to gain a deeper understanding of all the complex things that children are doing when it simply looks like play. And that's a lot of what this session is about. It's to increase our value of play, but also use intentional strategies to help children to become the little humans that we aspire for them to be. So we're talking about brain development, which starts at a very young age and continues really throughout our life. But there's a surge of learning and growth that happens in the early years. And we're going to talk about what executive function skills are, why they're important, how we can support the growth and development of executive function skills through really simple interactions, through the things that children are already going to do, those times during the day when they play. So we're going to start by talking about brain development. There's 5 key concepts that we want to remember. There's a rapid growth period in the first 3 years. So in the United States and in many countries around the world, formal education starts somewhere between 3 or 4 years old to up to 8 years old. And we often think about formal education as being the part of life where learning happens. But research actually shows that the most growth in our brains occurs in the first 3 years. And we're going to look at a graph that will show us what types of learning happen in each kind of phase of young childhood. But what we want to remember is that even before formal schooling, and even if a child is in an early childhood school, there is still a lot of growth and learning that's happening very quickly and very early on that we want to optimize in our homes and interactions with our young children. One of the things that is also important to remember is that it's dependent on repetition. And we'll look at how the brain develops so we can further understand why repetition is so important. But these are the kinds of moments when your child asks you to reread a book for the 37th time. And you might be tired of reading that story. You know the pictures by heart, you know the words by heart. And if we can remember what's happening inside their brains, that can help us remember why that 37th time is so important. Children also learn through an overlap of existing and new ideas. And that has a technical term called the zone of proximal development. But basically that means that our learning experiences need to be connected to something that we already know and understand. and it's a further extension of our existing knowledge. And that can help us grow along a continuum of accommodating new information. Growth for young children happens best through fun and trust. We don't always think about play and growth and learning as being big risks, but for children, they can be. And they're more likely to take risks with somebody that they trust. So, for example, parents are often the first to see their child take a step. And with someone that they love and they trust, that they have a secure attachment relationship with, they're much more comfortable taking a risk and trying something new that might feel like they might fail, they might struggle, that with that support of that relationship, they're more likely to be successful and work through difficulty. Additionally, fun takes the pressure off. And so when we make learning fun for children, they often forget they are learning and growing, that it's just something that they do by nature. And last, we want to remember that young children are sensory motor learners. So cognitive and language skills are going to happen through sensory motor experiences in the early years. So we often see children as being very physical, very active, very sensory, touching everything, putting things in their mouths. Many children gravitate toward sensory experiences like sand or water, and many children avoid experiences like sand and water. So our sensory motor engagement level is going to have a pretty broad range, but it plays a significant role in how children learn. So even as we want children to grasp ideas that we're going to talk about today, it happens best through physical experiences, even if as an adult, it seems like a cognitive or language skill. So let's dive into brain development a little bit more. This graph shows different areas of development. It's color-coded so we can focus in on different aspects. And this graph is from the Council for Early Childhood Development. And what we notice here, if we look at, say, the black line here, the black line represents the range in which children learn numbers. And sometimes we want children to have that skill pretty early. I often have parents of toddlers, wanting us to do rote counting and asking when their children are going to count. But you can see this graph here shows that ability really starts around age 2 and continues well into the school years, that children under 2 aren't developmentally ready to grasp something like the concept of numbers. Similarly, the peer social skills, you can see, doesn't really peak until 2 to 3 years either. So very young children struggle to understand those social dynamics of relationships because it's not part of the way that their brain is developing at that time. In contrast, we do see some skills that are peaking between the birth and first year, specifically habitual ways of responding, language, emotional control, even hearing and vision start right at birth. And what we want to do is really understand during what periods that are optimal for growth and learning, so we can focus our strategies and our attention to those specific areas of learning. So things like vision and hearing, we know are going to begin to develop right as children are born, and we can see those progressions in the way that babies track objects, the way that they follow our movements, the way their face lights up when they make eye contact with an adult. We can see those things happening. We can see their responses to noises in the environment, and we interact with them in a way that supports vision and hearing. The other things that start early, language, that happens a lot through our talking and our interaction, but the habitual ways of responding and the emotional control are specifically connected. Those are the green and pink lines here. Those elements are specifically related to executive function skills. And if you've attended previous sessions with me, you recall us talking about self-regulation. And self-regulation has to do with our biological rhythms, but also how we respond to and manage our emotions. That's this pink line, emotional control. And that includes habitual ways of responding to situations. And if you recall, or if this is your first session, I want to explain that self-regulation develops from co-regulation. So that means that children copy, imitate, and learn responses to situations and responses to emotions by watching the people around them. So some of the ways that we teach children emotional control is through our own emotional control. But we can also model and role play those things by using dolls, stuffed animals, puppets, any kind of character play during those playful interactions with children to help them practice and learn appropriate ways for emotional control and habitual ways of responding. So as adults, we know long-term, we're going to need math skills and reading skills. And what we want to remember is that those don't quite develop until we're closer into the preschool years, 2, 3, 4 years old. What we have in the early years, birth to 1 to 2, is a significant opportunity to create really healthy habits around processing emotions. And if you attended the session on power struggles, you know that that can be tricky because before children learn to manage their emotions, we see big outbursts first. So we're going to talk more today about how we can have playful interactions that support this executive function skill as part of that early brain development. But let's take a look at what brain development looks like. These scans here show the neural connections in an individual's brain. You can see a newborn here, 1 month, 9 months, 2 years, and adult. And what I want to point out is that in the very beginning, with a newborn, there are very few connections. There's some. This is where we start to see the vision and hearing develop. They have the ability to cry. They, have impulses to move their body. And at a month old, we see a greater number of connections. At 9 months, even greater. 2 years, we see a rapid amount of connections in the child's brain. And even in the adult, we see a lot of connections there. And the difference between the 2-year-old's brain and the adult's brain is we see a greater density in the connections in the adult's brain. And this is where a lot of repetition has occurred. So if you think about, say, a 9-month-old who isn't walking yet, you're not going to see a walking connection there. For a 2-year-old who is likely walking, you'll see a fairly strong connection of walking. The child has probably been walking for a year. An adult who is, say, 25 years old has been walking for likely around 24 years old. That brain connection that helps the coordination and balance of walking should have a really secure, thick, dense, here you'll see it as a black connection. It's something that the adult can do very, very well because the adult has had a lot of practice. So what happens between birth and 3 years is that we provide children with a lot of experiences. That's why this 2-year scan looks so busy. There are so many experiences, and that's good. And what happens in the years after that is our brains begin pruning or eliminating or getting rid of connections that we don't really need anymore. We need things like walking, talking, feeding ourselves, using language, but there's connections that we don't need. And that might be a sensory experience, that might be things we've overheard that aren't relevant to our lives. As adults, we still know how to crawl, but we don't typically spend as much time crawling as, say, a child would. And so there becomes a shift in the strength of connections, and it's good. It means that our brain can put more effort to things that we need and not give a lot of effort to things that we don't need. So when we compare and think about the brain, we want to give a lot of opportunities in the first few years to create really secure and dense connections around behaviors and responses we do want. So if we look at this adult scan here, there's several areas that are very dark, very secure connections around things that an adult needs. So for me, already in my day, it was important that I remembered how to take care of my body and get dressed. It's important that I remembered how to drive a car. It's important that I remembered how to interact with others. And those might be the really dense, dark places on that brain scan. And those are all appropriate, healthy, successful things that my brain has learned how to do over the years. And when children don't have opportunities to create healthy responses to situations or learn healthy emotional regulation, and let's say they have a behavior that is not healthy. Let's say a child at a young age learns to throw things and use swear words when they're angry, maybe from watching an adult who doesn't have that self-regulation. If a child has created a pattern of behavior that is not socially acceptable, like hitting, throwing things, using swear words, that connection can still become strong, but not in a way that is good for the child. And that connection can be very hard for our brain to make another kind of go-to route for a response. So all that is to say, our opportunities in early childhood are really important because we want to create healthy responses and healthy growth. The opposite side, when children don't have a chance to create healthy responses, it can be very hard to create new habits. So going back to that previous graph, that's that green line here. Our habitual ways of responding develop very early, around age 1 and 2. And our focus, our brain's focus on that development drops around age 4. So that means we already have some habits, pretty strong habits in place by age 4. So our responsibility as parents of young children and educators of young children is to create really good habits early on, which means our habits that we're modeling need to be really good, and we need to really be paying attention to the expectations that we give for children. So this is what our brain development looks like, where our goal is to create strong connections that are positive, effective, desirable responses to situations so that we're successful adults. There's one more graph that I want to take a look at, and this is in regards to repetition and retention. So the number of times that we repeat an experience directly impacts a child's ability to remember it. So for example, you notice that I speak English. And when I was in school as a young child, we had a French teacher come in once a week and teach us the French language and a little bit about the history of the country, France. And I don't remember any French. I think I can say hello. I think I can say what my name is, maybe count to 5. And that's it, because I didn't have enough repetition. And so if you look at this graph, you can see these light blue lines show an opportunity for repetition, and we see a spike in how much is remembered. But as time goes on without repetition, that's that dashed green line, if you don't have repetition, the amount that you remember phases out. So that's what happened for me learning French. I had a lot of exposure to English. Most people in my life speak English. And so I would get that repetition every single day. So my retention, what I remember of English, is very, very high. And that can be fairly easy for us to understand. Likely you have your primary language and you've probably had some exposure to another language, maybe several languages. My son currently attends a Spanish speaking school, so he's fluent in English and Spanish. He has daily interactions in Spanish, so he remembers a lot of it. I had 3 years speaking Spanish in high school, and I don't remember as much, but my son is helping me with my brain growth and development with that right now. When we apply this to behavior, we want to think about the number of opportunities children have to learn appropriate expectations. And so that can happen through modeling, that can happen through reading stories, that can happen through using puppets, that can happen through description, that can happen through acknowledging children's behavior that is appropriate and successful. So what this does is it allows us to give lots of opportunity for repetition, to grow those parts of the brain, to increase the amount that is remembered. And that's directly connected to those very secure brain connections on that slide that we looked at previously. So our goal is to give children lots of opportunities. And sometimes when we think about some areas of development, say walking, it takes children several months to learn how to walk. They're coordinating their legs, they're shifting their balance, they have to change their body position. There's a lot that has to happen. And we give children several months to figure that out. And eventually they do. When we think about children learning how to write, that can take a couple years to really get that fine motor control, to understand the function of writing, to know how to write the letters, symbols, or characters that represent what we want to communicate. And we give children all of those experiences to develop those skills. When it comes to things like social emotional development or executive function skills, sometimes we forget to give that same kind of time, that we want children to know how to manage their emotions very quickly, sometimes even after the first redirection. But even more than gross motor skills, social emotional skills can take a lot longer to develop, more practice. They need more repetition. They need to use it and apply it in more circumstances to understand how to keep using what they've learned in different ways. So we want a lot of repetition and retention. Anything that you want a child to learn, you want to think about many ways that they can learn it and in many different contexts. So practicing in different ways, applying it in different circumstances are all going to help that growth. So activities that we can use to support this kind of brain development, a lot of sensory play. Remembering that their bodies need to be very busy, that they learn through these kind of interactions. And even sensory play can help them explore and discover their preferences, how they communicate what they like and what they don't like. And that's very foundational in understanding other people's responses and reactions to things. Songs and finger plays are a really fun way to grow the brain, make those language connections. Any kind of experience that provides rhyming and rhythm supports later literacy skills. We know children aren't ready to read until they're older, maybe around age 5, but really for comprehension, not until age 8. But we can set the foundation for that kind of learning and the brain development that's going to allow for that to happen early on by fun songs and finger plays. Games like peekaboo and hide and seek help children remember information, follow through. They develop the anticipation of an outcome and the success of how it's going to end. Cause and effect games like rolling balls, using ramps in cars can help them again anticipate an outcome and see the result. Matching game and puzzles can grow the brain by noticing details, making connections, trial and error, and seeing how things fit together. Nesting and stacking materials help children notice differences, explore balance, think about how things work together and can be used in combination. Reading books is going to build rapid brain development, especially when we use a range that includes rhyming words, talk about emotions, looks at people who are the same or different than us, naming items in books, noticing things that are the same or different. Any kind of mirror play can be really valuable. It allows children to observe themselves. So it could be role-playing emotions in front of a mirror. It could simply be reading or talking in front of a mirror. They will likely notice things about themselves that will also help them notice things about other people, making connections in their brain around how people are different, how people are similar, and how we can connect with others. And then Play-Doh and clay, part of that sensory play, but again, lots of opportunities for development to occur, both physically from a sensory standpoint, and using things like Play-Doh and clay can also reduce tension. So when children aren't able to express their emotions effectively yet, Play-Doh and clay can be a really valuable strategy to help get some of that tension out. The thing about supporting brain development is that it's very complex. And so most of the experiences children have support some kind of development in the brain, even if it's something that they maybe don't want to do. What we want to do is find lots of opportunities that children do want to do. When it's low pressure, when they're engaged in play, we can support specific areas of development that maybe aren't growing naturally in other ways, but that can feel fun for them. So every type of experience supports some kind of brain development. We want to intentionally provide some of these fun experiences that we know are going to develop these specific skills. So that's brain development. And I would like to focus a little bit on executive function skills. That includes working memory, flexible thinking, and inhibitory control, which I'll describe a little more in action. But a couple key points about executive function skills. They are developed in low pressure situations, and that allows our brain to access them in high pressure situations. And this is really important to remember because we often expect people to have executive function skills in very difficult situations, but that's not necessarily where we learn them. We learn them in very low pressure situations. So if we think about this in a more mature adult context, in the United States, we learn how to drive cars around the age of 16. And when a 16-year-old learns how to drive a car, we don't put them into rush hour, big city traffic. We put them in an empty parking lot, and that's where we practice first. So think about that difference between low pressure, empty parking lot situation versus high pressure, rush hour, inner city traffic situation. Similarly, if you think about learning to cook, you typically don't start by cooking a large family gathering for a big holiday event. That would be extremely high pressure. A lot of people, a special day, probably some dishes that are important to the family. You would start in a very low pressure situation, maybe just cooking for yourself, maybe just cooking for one other person, and trying a recipe that maybe feels a little more familiar, easier, safer. Any skill that we want to have in a difficult situation, we need to develop in a low pressure situation. And this is really true and important for executive function skills. They also allow us to combine skills and use what we understand and know in combination. And the goal is really to develop transferability, meaning that we want to be able to use these skills in a variety of different situations. That when we think about practicing responding to emotions, we're going to need that in a lot of contexts. We need to manage our behavior in all situations. So children learn how to manage their behavior at home before they need to practice managing their behavior, maybe in the grocery store, driving in traffic, in the workplace, in social relationships at school. The ways that we practice these experiences and develop children's skills early on in the home allow them to transfer those skills into other settings as they grow and mature, which makes this really necessary for lifelong success. So let's talk a little bit more about what executive function skills look like in action. So I named the 3 executive function skills: inhibitory control, working memory, and flexible thinking. And a really simple way to think about that process is stop, think, and act. So essentially, inhibitory control is that moment when we stop ourselves from reacting in a way that maybe not be safe or healthy or productive. It's what stops us from throwing something when we get upset, or punching a wall, or driving into the car in front of us if we're feeling frustrated. For children, you've probably observed your own children may not exercise inhibitory control when they feel frustrated about something or they don't get what they want. I mentioned having a 1-year-old at home, and he regularly throws things when he doesn't get what he wants. He's still developing his inhibitory control. What we notice through support and opportunities and practice over time is that he's throwing things less. He's developing his ability to stop, think, and then act. And that can take a few years to develop. I have a 7-year-old also, so I get to observe kind of the long-term picture of supporting these skills and responses to see that it really does work. That with a lot of practice and reminders about acceptable behavior, we can develop the ability to pause, consider, and then proceed. Working memory is the ability to hold a lot of information in our mind. And it means that when something happens, we pause, there's that stop part, but then we think about all of our options. So for example, when a child wants to have a piece of cake or a brownie for breakfast, instead of throwing a fit, they're probably going to stop. We want them to think and consider what their options are and then act. So for them, they have to remember that a brownie isn't a breakfast food. The choices are cereal or fruit or eggs or oatmeal, and then make a decision. And we might not really see that process develop more until children are around the age of 5 or 6, maybe even 7 or 8. But we can see glimpses of it in children even as young as 1. So as we redirect children from things like hitting or throwing things, when we see them pause, we know that they're developing some of these executive function skills, and we can acknowledge that when it's happening. One of the things that's challenging about executive function skills is it's not like walking, where we can see walking happening concretely. We know when a child starts walking. It can be harder to see that a child has developed their executive function skills. And just like walking, it's not always perfect, right? Even someone who has learned how to walk may at some times stumble or may even fall. So we want to recognize that a child who has developed some executive function skills might still make mistakes. A child who has developed executive function skills might still stumble a little bit. And I was thinking about a situation with my 7-year-old last night, and I observed an interaction with my husband. My son had a dinner that had some cheese on it, and he wanted his dinner heated up. And so my husband heated it up for him. And then my son was very upset that the cheese had melted. And he asked for, his food to be remade. And my husband and I were talking about it later, and my husband felt like my son was being a little, whiny and not wanting the food the way that it was. And then we talked about all the ways that our son did display his executive function skills. He didn't throw his food on the floor. He didn't cry. He didn't yell. He didn't run away. He asked for his food to be remade. So even while that may seem like an unreasonable expectation that we're not always going to make a new plate of food, we do want to recognize his ability to control his behavior, consider his options, and take action that felt very reasonable to us as adults. Worked out well for my 7-year-old that my 1-year-old was still hungry and he didn't care what his food was like. And so it worked out that he could have the food the way that he wanted it prepared. But what we want to do is notice these moments of success, because even at 7 years old, executive function skills are still developing. Of course, I expect my 7-year-old would not be throwing food, but he's still a child. So there's still times that he's going to display a behavior that may not seem respectful or would fit what we would expect in our family. So it might be possible that sometimes he runs away or he says something harsh like, "I hate you," and he didn't do any of those things. So when we see executive function skills in action, we want to acknowledge that. We want to see, "I saw that you were going to throw that and you stopped your body. That was safer that you didn't throw that." Even if it's a child as young as 1, we're starting to reinforce the behaviors that we do expect. And if we think back to that repetition and retention, it builds those connections of what appropriate expectations are. So the more that we acknowledge children, the more that they can repeat those actions that make a secure connection of a behavior that is acceptable, rather than repeating a behavior that is not. It's very abstract to see how these develop over a range of time. So it's important that we consider activities that will help support executive function skills, remembering that this happens best through play, right? We want to develop these skills in a low pressure situation versus a high pressure situation. So for my son last night, how food is prepared does not seem high pressure, but there's a lot happening for my son right now. It's been 8 months nearly in a pandemic. He found out this week that he is no longer going to school. His school has gone full remote due to the pandemic. So he's lost his connections with his friends. I've been working all day, so he has missed me a lot. And so sometimes there are moments where, how food is prepared doesn't seem like a big deal. But when children are accommodating a lot of other stresses, sometimes we see children acting out in situations that don't seem like a big deal, but they've just had all that they can manage. So we do want him to exercise his executive function skills in that situation. But if we hadn't seen it, we'd want to come back to these kinds of activities that can allow him to develop his executive function skills in a low pressure, playful way. So when we think about that process of stop, think, and act, these activities can really help with the stopping and thinking and acting component. So doing start and stop games like Simon Says, or red light, green light, or freeze dancing can be ways that children learn how to control their bodies. Remember, they learn through their bodies before they can develop their language and cognitive skills. So if they can learn how to stop and start their body, they can also learn how to stop and start their thinking. So something like freeze dancing can be very simple. This can be playing a song that your child likes and pausing it. And when you pause the song, everyone has to freeze like a statue. And even very young children, even a 1-year-old, can start to learn the concept of this game through modeling. And it's very important for control, not just physical control. It has a lot more to do with mental control, because it also means remembering the rules. When the music stops, my body stops. So it's about control, but it's also about memory. It's also about anticipation. So waiting for that time when that music is going to stop. Another way that you can play that type of game is to simply sing a song and pick an action for a word. When that word comes up, the child completes that action. So for example, you might sing the song Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and every time you hear the word star, clap your hands. Star only comes up 2 times in that song. So there's only 2 times to clap hands. But through the whole song, the child has to focus and listen and wait and remember the rule of clapping when they hear the word star. So you can do this activity with any song that your family loves. Choose a word, choose an action. You can change the action because that also means the child has to remember a new rule. So this isn't just about remembering rules of the household. When we help children remember rules in a game, something playful that they want to do, that's fun and exciting, they are developing the connections in their brain that will let them remember other rules, traffic rules, safety rules, home expectation rules, but we're developing it in a low pressure, fun, playful situation. The older children are, the more that you can invite them into the process, letting them choose the song, letting them choose the action. If we were playing this freeze dancing game at home, I would probably let my 7-year-old choose the song and may even let him pause the music. Giving him that control is exciting, and he still has to remember the rules, and he would watch to make sure the rest of us are following the rules. So engaging them in the process, the older that they are, can increase the excitement and buy-in for them. Memory games like hiding objects, having several objects and taking one away and asking what's missing, even simply naming or identifying people or objects in photos. And these are things that you can do with children that are very young. For hiding objects, even with an infant, if you partially hide an object, say with a scarf or a blanket, they have to remember that the rest of the object is still there. So for example, if you cover, say, the back half of a stuffed dog with a blanket, a very young baby knows that those back legs and tail exists and they have to find it. And so that's part of their memory and also taking action. Guessing games like making animal noises and having the child name the animal or vice versa, giving clues for animals. This is a game that we often play when we're waiting. And now that my 7-year-old is older, we can take turns. So sometimes he has us guess. But again, it's keeping a lot of ideas in mind and having to retrieve those ideas to make a decision. A similar game is called 21 Questions, where you ask questions about a specific object, idea, animal, person. And then simple observation and imitation games. Copycat, playing I Spy to notice objects around you, miming different actions and having them guess, and feely boxes, simply maybe using a shoebox or a delivery package box, putting something inside with a little hole where they can reach in. And it requires them to use their senses and hold concepts in their mind. So all of these things are playful, but they have really important components that help children grow those connections in their brain that they can access again for how to respond and behave appropriately in different situations. So let's think a little bit more about play and what your opportunities are for children. We want to remember that while brain development can occur in any context, we need to give many, many opportunities for play. That means that we want to find even just a few minutes in our day, if you have a busy schedule, where we play these kinds of games. I mentioned that anytime that we're waiting, if we're driving in the car, we're waiting in a doctor's office, we're waiting in line at the grocery store, we play these kinds of game with our son. And the guessing animals game, I think, started around when he was 2. And when I was a toddler teacher in a 1-year-old classroom or 2-year-old classroom, we would start these kind of guessing games by simply making animal noises. And that might mean having 3 pictures of animals and making the noise of one. And they have to identify the picture that matches the noise by pointing. And that's a game that a simple, a 1-year-old could play. The older children get, the more you can incorporate language and have them guess and ask questions. But those kinds of things can happen even when you're simply waiting. It doesn't have to be a designated time of day. Make sure that you're taking opportunities to play with children. They learn best through relationship. So it's important for children to play independently, but there's also times where they can benefit from having a play partner. And if they're trying out something new, if they're exploring difficult emotions, that learns best when they are playing with someone that they love and that they trust. When you're playing with children, make sure that you follow their lead, give them an opportunity to be in control. This can help build trust and perspective and help them feel powerful. Remember to support repetition, thinking back to the way that our brain develops. It's important for children to have lots of opportunities to do the same thing over and over. So it might mean reading the same book. It might mean your baby is dropping something and wanting you to pick it up over and over. And the benefit is them understanding that the outcome is the same, that they drop something and it falls. They drop something and it falls. It helps them understand those concepts. The more repetition they have, the stronger those brain connections are. Remember to combine familiar and challenging experiences. So we want children to have new experiences, but they are most successful when they are connected to prior experiences. Open-ended materials can also support children's brain development. The more materials children have that, say, do things for them, like making music or cars that roll on their own, the less it engages children and the less their brain develops in those interactions. It's one of the reasons that children so naturally love things like boxes. It gives them something that they can play with and manipulate in a way that isn't decided for them. It gives them control and it helps them think. If you have a material that doesn't have an intended purpose, they have to explore different ideas, what they understand about a box, something cardboard, something lightweight, something bigger than them. And they can make those connections between what they know about those things and what they can do with it with something that's new and undetermined. And we want to balance child-initiated and adult-initiated experiences. So we want to give children opportunities to simply play and explore, whether that's outside or inside. But then we can also provide experiences that we initiate. So in my family, we read every night before bedtime. That's something that we've decided on as adults, but we let our children choose the book that we're going to read. So we give them some control, but we keep that routine because we know the value of reading a book. There's other times that we plan experiences that we know are intentional, even like the freeze dancing game. I might intentionally initiate because I'm noticing my children could use a little more practice in their executive function skills, but I might let them choose the song, or they may not even consider that it was my decision to play the game because they're so excited to play it. So we want to create opportunities where they can make decisions, but it's okay for us to make decisions too. And all of these concepts are really important because they have a really important long-term impact. They secure the foundational skills to allow other types of learning to occur. So before children know how to be successful in social relationships outside of the home, they need to learn how to be successful in social relationships inside the home. Before they can work on their impulse control or their inhibitory control, they need to practice controlling their bodies and making decisions about how to interact and behave in socially appropriate ways. It develops their self-regulation, their ability to control, manage, respond primarily to emotions, but other biological cues and other input that children receive. It supports innovative thinking. The more opportunities we give children to make connections between experiences, the more that we can see their ability to think creatively, to think differently, to apply concepts to multiple situations. And we want that integration of skills. It'd be very difficult to prepare anyone for every life circumstance. But when we can help children develop skills and use them in similar situations, they develop that transferability and to integrate skills across different areas. This also helps children develop problem-solving skills. They develop their ability to understand trial and error, what's successful, how to come up with different ideas, how to respect the ideas of others. And that can be really important in social situations and educational situations as well. They also develop self-trust. They learn that they have valuable ideas. They learn that they are capable of modifying their behavior if it hasn't been appropriate or socially acceptable. They learn that they can grow and they can try again. Just like a child may stumble, they learn how to get back up. So when children have not exercised executive function skills, they learn that they're capable of trying again and having a different outcome. And it simply sets the foundation for enjoyment and learning. So these experiences can help them grow through play and create the pathways that help them enjoy learning, even in situations when they get to maybe more formal learning settings. Their brain has already established secure pathways for acquiring new information, being curious, and being successful in learning situations. So I'm going to shift to, we have some questions coming in here, and we will see how many we can answer. Oh, this is a great question. So any websites or YouTube link where we can see all the ideas that that I shared, and I will find out from the coordinators if there's a way to add a link or provide you with additional resources. I'm happy to put that together. Some practical ways or materials that you can use, and that's a really good question. So the games that I talked about would be probably the easiest way to support the executive function skill development. And as far as say brain development, really thinking about open-ended materials, and you don't necessarily have to go out and buy things. That might be simply use things that you have in your home. So for my children, we play a lot with boxes. My 7-year-old and 1-year-old were in a box together today playing this morning. And that open-ended experience is really valuable. So things like boxes or even like empty food containers that have been washed out. My children have their own set of real dishes that they can play with. They have a lot of tubes, and my children often, play with sticks and things like that outside. Because they don't have an intended purpose, that open-ended component can help develop all kinds of brain connections in relation to understanding components of an object, how objects work together, thinking of their own ideas, following through, using them in different ways. And when children have open-ended materials, they need fewer materials because things can be used in so many different ways. Someone asked to clarify, by repetition, you mean not repeating the same way, but exposing students to different opportunities and experiences? Excellent question. And it's actually both. I'm so glad you asked, because I should clarify that. So for example, if you are introducing a song to a child, so a song that we often sing here is Row, Row, Row Your Boat. And it's a pretty simple song. We want to give some repetition in singing the song over and over and over and over as it is. It helps them learn the lyrics. It helps them learn the tempo. It helps them learn the rhythm. And we also want to sing other songs. And other songs gives the repetition of singing with the difference of the song. Singing the same song over and over will give the repetition of the same song. But we can also take that same song and introduce some new concepts too. So we can take a song like Row, Row, Row Your Boat, and we could sing it really fast, or we could sing it really slow. And changing just the tempo of the song keeps the familiarity of the words, but it adds the newness of tempo. And we could do the same by singing it high-pitched or really deep, or we could change the first sound. So we could say, we could change the first letter. We could say, po, po, po your boat, rather than row, row, row your boat. And it's playing around with phonological awareness. And so they would get the same tempo, the same rhythm, the same melody of the song, but they would get different sounds, and they would start to make connections about rhyming. So as a classroom teacher, we might take a very simple song like Row, Row, Row Your Boat and build on the familiarity of that and the repetition of it by changing one little dynamic that will help them learn something new. So those examples that I just gave play around with phonological awareness, plays around with time, plays around with some other components too. So both, great question. You want to repeat the exact same experiences to build a strong connection. You want to modify experiences slightly to introduce new ideas. And then you also want to build in some completely new ideas that maybe have a familiar element, in this example of simply just singing, that the familiarity in a new song could simply be the singing element. Age-wise, playing games, where can we find those? Toys according to ages for play development of baby. So, You can always look at, the product information, but I always caution parents and teachers about product information because that has so much to do with marketing, and it's not always in the child and family's best interests. We want to trust that people are marketing ideas with learning in mind, but the key goal of marketing is to make a sale. So again, the best thing would be open-ended materials, and the more that the material does, the less the child does. So even if you're looking to purchase things, I always recommend having a solid set of blocks, and that might be wood blocks, cardboard blocks, anything that allows for stacking, nesting materials, so nesting cups, nesting eggs, things that can be stacked, put together in different ways. Puzzles can range from pegboard puzzles to wood puzzles, and as children get older, cardboard or large puzzles that are 25 plus pieces. Balls are always a really playful activity. It's really helpful to have anything that children can practice social interactions with, and that can simply be little animals, that can be small people, that can be puppets, any stuffed animals, any things like that. Children are very inclined to take animals or people and role play different ideas. So those would be valuable materials for a variety of ages. Someone has a question, tips to boost play and skills with kids with other children, as well as how to increase turn taking. Yeah, so this is really important too. Turn taking is a very difficult skill to learn. And if we think back to the graph that I showed about when our brains develop different skills, that tends to happen for children much more around 4 to 7 years old and understanding social dynamics. But we can help children as young as 1, even younger than 1, as soon as they're sitting up, really learn about turn taking by rolling balls back and forth. And as children get older, you can start to add some language to it about turn taking. So the age that my son is right now, he's almost 20 months old. If we're rolling a ball back and forth, I'm going to say, Mommy's taking a turn, Thomas is taking a turn, Mommy's taking a turn, Thomas is taking a turn. And that helps him to internalize the language of turn taking, and he's experiencing the back and forth. I have the ball, now you have the ball, it's your turn, now it's my turn. So that when we get to an opportunity where children need to be turn taking with another child, we can say, this is just like rolling the ball. Remember, I had the ball, and then you had the ball, and then I got the ball back, and then you got the ball back. And we're going to do that with this toy here. We're going to use turn taking just like when we roll a ball. So that can be helpful to build in that language early. The other thing is to think about strategies that children understand in turn taking. And one of the most abstract things about taking turns has to do with time. So we can help children by using things like a sand timer or even a visual timer on your a tablet or mobile device that they can see. That if we talk about turn taking in relation to time, that can be a lot harder for children to understand how long a minute is, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. That if we use a visual timer, we keep sand timers in my house, even for things like brushing teeth or waiting for food to be ready. That if we use a visual tool, it gives them a little more autonomy and control because they can see how the time is passing and they know when their turn is coming, and they can learn to anticipate when that time is going to be up and it's going to be their turn, which is directly related to executive function, because watching that time fall through the sand timer, that's the stop, think, and act. They have to stop their body from impulsively taking the toy. They have to think and remember that time is passing, and the act is to hold their action until it's their turn. So I would use a visual turn taking, a timekeeping thing that they can use to understand how time is passing in those shared experiences. Other tips for helping children interact: it's good to have interactions together. If you can also provide interactions where they can have time alone with adult, that can help because the adult can model social relationships, but many times it may be you and your 2, 3, 4 children alone, and you don't have those individual interactions. Having enough materials of the similar materials, supporting children in understanding cooperative play. So even saying things like, Jojo is building a tower. Do you want to add something to her tower? Do you want to build one next to her? Can help them notice what someone else is doing, potential opportunity to participate, and even helping children set boundaries can be important. So if Sammy is interested in building with Jojo and Jojo doesn't want any help, it's okay to say to Sammy that Jojo is building a tower right now. She doesn't need any help. What do you want to do? And so we can narrate what we would naturally do in our social interactions to help build children's awareness of someone else's perspective, ideas, or intentions. So sometimes we want to help them connect, and sometimes we want to help them respect boundaries. Any other questions that you have? One of the questions that came up in the development of this workshop was a question about what negatively impacts brain development. And I think this is an important question. We talked mostly about how to support brain development. So it's important to recognize that, our experiences in our home, we are always well intended, but we want to think about exposure to things like TV and media. And part of it is because when children are watching TV, not much is happening in their brains. It's a very passive experience. They can't absorb the information the way that adults' brains can. And that's just because of where we are in our development. It's more important for children to be very active in any type of experience. So things like TV and screen time can be very limiting in brain development because it's not physical. Brain development happens mostly through physical active engagement. It's also important to think about nutrition and exposure to the behavior of others. So we want to be mindful of our interactions, that we're modeling the skills that we want children to have. Someone asked also about executive function and ADD. And I think the key thing here with ADHD is that we are keeping things as active as possible, that they need that activity. It's a lot about the intensity of sensory input. So we need to do more. We also need to identify and recognize, acknowledge, and name when a child is behaving appropriately and acceptably, socially acceptably in any given situation to help them repeat and reiterate what's expected. For any child who is struggling with their development or behavior, any visual tool that we can offer about expectations is really important. So for a child who may not always remember what's safe, acceptable, and appropriate, providing a visual cards, here are your 3 choices in this situation, can help them have control or self-regulate over their options for how they can behave in a given moment. And also just to remember that any kind of learning is a spectrum. And so we're all in a path of growth. We're all looking to develop our skills, us as parents, our children. And so if a child has something like ADHD, that we need to recognize where they are on that growth spectrum might be a little bit different than someone else their age or someone else in the same circumstances, even a sibling who's grown up in the same house, that we're all unique and individual and learning at our own pace. So we want to focus on not necessarily 100% perfection, but that we want to focus on growth, where we see that they are developing and reiterating those developmental patterns. And then I would say with ADHD or any other developmental difference, it's always important to get that advice of any medical professionals. If you have any therapists that have been giving your family support, they're going to have really good advice for you to understand your child individually and how what strategies might be useful to develop and build these skills. I want to thank you all so much for joining me this evening. I know your time is precious, your time with your family and your time to take care of yourself. So thank you for being here. I appreciate your time and your questions.